We got a question from LB as well. He says, has to do with philosophy and science. Is metaphysics just speculative or not? And he heard science can overlap with it. That's an interesting question. What do you mean by overlap in that sense? Because if something's metaphysical, you know, science is about testing the physical. So I don't see how that there's necessarily that. You could have a metaphysical claim and try and think of a method to find the link between the metaphysical and the physical, I guess. But I'm not exactly sure. What do you think, Dave?
I think, yes, they can overlap. Metaphysics can shape science in the sense of, say, think of Popper's falsification.
Mm-hmm.
That's a metaphysical theory that shapes the science and how we investigate the physical. And if you think about something like the problem of mind, you know, there are metaphysical applications to the philosophy of mind, but they should be shaped by the science, because think of something like free will. Free will is a metaphysical thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's discussed in a metaphysical way, but the more we learn about neurology, the more our account of free will should be shaped by the science.
Yeah, and determinism as well. That makes sense. So yeah, there is an overlap. They do potentially influence each other, but maybe not quite as good. Science could study metaphysics someday. Yeah, it
I'm not
depends.
sure.
I've got a
Because,
metaphysical microscope right here.
yeah, that's the thing. Metaphysical is properties over and above the actual physical workings. So
Mm.
ethics would be morality would be a metaphysical property, but we could use the science of psychology to shape
Yeah,
ethics.
yeah. Like when we're talking about abuse, and there's been plenty of studies on the effects of abuse, and how there's damage to the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of that person, cause ongoing suffering for them, and not just them, for their family and friends and everyone they might interact with after that sort of thing happens, which then feeds back into ethics as well. So you do have that almost feedback loop of things. We wouldn't necessarily be able to go right. Actually, well, not ethically anyway. Create a society and put them in different boxes and say, right, we're going to try this form of ethics in this one. This one's going to be purely consequentialist utilitarianism. This one's going to be brought up on Kantian ethics, and this one's going to be virtue based. And let's find out what works best. I
Yeah,
mean, we'd probably say that was quite unethical in the same way that you would with the Truman Show.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, there are philosophers that also reject the metaphysical completely. I think Patricia Churchland is one. Her husband is another one, and I can't remember his name. But AJ Ayer, and I think Wittgenstein at one point rejected metaphysics completely. I can't remember exactly though.
Blimey, I mean that's a large chunk of philosophy to just go no to.
Well, they say it should be grounded in the physical. If any statement is made and it can't be verified, think of something like a positivist or a verificationist. If it can't be verified, then it can't be considered a proposition.
Yeah, I mean there's obviously a lot of problems with positivism and verificationism, as we highlighted when we did our knowledge and certainty video. If you're interested in that one, that's in the playlist called Fresh Air. It's part of a two-part series. The first one on beliefs and logic, and the second on knowledge and certainty. Um, it's interesting. So, but then
But I mean,
isn't couldn't we say the theories of knowledge aren't exactly physical either.
They're metaphysical,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
that gets really confusing.
it does. If you think as well, some people think of the term metaphysical as dealing with something like God only.
Mm,
Things that exist that are immaterial and out of reach and all speculative. And that can be considered, I mean, God could be considered a metaphysical idea,
hmm.
uh, but not all metaphysical ideas are ideas like God.
No, no, and I think some of them we can actively see the impact a hell of a lot more. Um, so would they have rejected, like, ethics completely, or would they have taken a more
They
um,
take a more science based
to,
approach.
like we were discussing the studies on abuse and things like that? We can see the impact that this has and causes suffering. Therefore, we would regard that as unethical.
And
But
it's psychologically driven, it's part of our neurology. So they would consider it more sort of like an emotive response, and that
mm,
emotive response is created by our psychology, and it's rooted in the physical. If you're going for a metaphysical explanation, well, it can't be tested. It's essentially just speculation.
mm,
Does
makes
that make
sense.
sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it does. Yeah. Um, So LB, basically, there are other ways to study and falsify things like morality, mathematics, free will, language, God, no God, etc. Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of ways you can look at things. There are a lot of things that can't easily be tested, um, or at least can't be tested ethically. I gave away that we could actually test all ethical theories, um, but it would be a Truman Show style thing, but on whole societies. Um, Actually, there was that movie where there were different cities, weren't they? And they'd all been told that they were the last people in the world surviving, and they all had different rules and things like that. I'm trying to remember what it was called. I think I even started reading the books, and like the first book was really interesting, and then they just petered off after that. And then I watched the movie, and I don't know if I've seen any of the others. But there was the guy in it called Four, and they were all given certain qualities. So certain people would be those that would always tell the truth. Candor, the House of Candor, I believe. And then there were the intellectual house, and there were the gardening house, and all that. And basically, what happens is at the end of it, they sort of overrun everything, and they go and they see that actually, if they travel far enough, there are loads of these cities. But that's as far as I've got with the story. Um,
Not heard of that one.
no, it was an interesting concept, but I think poorly executed. So, but that in itself, we would, especially when you become aware that that's been happening to you, you're like, "What the fuck? We've been lied to our entire lives," and I don't think there is a way that we can ethically test ethics on a grand scale like that. All we can do is try and do what we've done, like studies on abuse, and see if we can compare it to human flourishing and things like that. And you can still make objective statements about what benefits the species as a whole, and things like that, but you can't test it in the same way as a scientific test, because it wouldn't be ethical to do so in itself. Again, free will. Dave mentioned free will earlier, but he spoke about how the more we understand about neurology, the more that should shape our understanding of free will. So there's that symbiotic thing there. Oops, sorry, between between science and metaphysics. Uh, language is an odd one. Yeah, linguistics. I've had too many conversations about semantics recently that I don't even want to address this one right now.
They're boring conversations for the most
Yeah.
part.
And God, no God. Yeah. So obviously God is a metaphysical claim. So it's one of the things that when fellow atheists say they want, verifiable evidence of God, don't get me wrong, I want that too, but I also understand that as a metaphysical thing, there probably isn't a physical thing. The most you can do is look for effects that could only be explained by a god. Um, but just because they're not there doesn't mean that there's not a god, so that becomes that it's really, really, really hard to test a god in that regard. The only thing you can really do is take a particular god claim and look for logical inconsistencies, and that's one of the biggest problems with the omnigod, as written in the Bible. That doesn't mean that it's not based on a deity. Of course, it could be. There could be some truth to it, but the way it's been written and the way a lot of Christians will describe their God is actually quite logically inconsistent and incoherent, and they don't even realize it. And again, you can get into a frustrating conversation if you go down that path. And to be honest, I'm not really interested in having that conversation anymore. You believe in God? Cool. Are you a decent person? All right, I don't care. Oh, you're using your God to justify being a bigot? Well, fuck you. Let's tear apart your God and you whilst I'm at it. That's the way I'd sort of approach that situation. I don't care if someone believes in God or not, or if someone's on the fence, or if they operate some different position. No real concern of mine, as long as they are a decent person and they're not using their deity to justify negative behaviors. Um, so
You can use reason and logic and rationality to justify asshole behavior as well.
you can. Yeah, I mean, someone even tried to do that to justify slavery. Well, it benefits the people that own the slave, so therefore it's moral. And you're
Bye.
like, yeah, again, you're not looking at the whole picture. You're not actually considering the infraction on human rights and all of that. Okay.
Yeah. Most people look at things through what could be generally considered a sort of selfish perspective. Like, consider, um, going back to the subject tonight, consider beauty. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is always subjective. What I determine to be beautiful is what's beautiful.
Mm,
At least for me, I can't be wrong about what's beautiful. But when you actually look into it, if you think about it, there are standards of judgment, like Kendall Walton says.
mm,
Um, but they generally only look at it through how they view the world.
mm. And you get the same arguments coming off of things like morality as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, I don't need to bring that one up again as well. I'm sure I've had enough rants about that one whilst we've been on air too.